So today, the three items, just to rehash a little bit, that I planned for us to do is succotash, which is a Native American food. All of the items that are in a succotash are originally from North or Central America. Succotash is a legume of some variety. As I mentioned earlier, today I wanted to do lima beans. Couldn't get lima beans, so I have field peas instead. Succotash is a legume with tomatoes and corn. All three of those are foods that the world owes to Native Americans. Corn, as I mentioned earlier, is specifically from central Mexico. Tomatoes probably are from northern South America, possibly from Central America. We know of several different tomato-related plants that are from the lowlands of Colombia, Costa Rica, Panama, southern Mexico, in that area. And then beans are also from the New World. Beans were, or at least these kind of beans, things like chickpeas and fava beans are originally from Asia and Europe. But the typical green bean or field pea that we're accustomed to are from probably what is now Texas, northern Mexico, as well as there are some relatives that come again from the sort of tropical rainforest area of South America. So this is about as traditional as it can possibly get. Three things that are from the New World through Native American cultures that have come to us today. Succotash, very simple. Then we're also going to be having a little salad of grilled squash with pickled red onions. And then we're going to close it off with some green beans and mushrooms. Sort of an almondine approach, but instead of almonds, I've brought along with me some sunflower seeds because they're tasty and interesting. And instead of using the classical lemon juice for an almondine, today I've brought lime juice with me instead because we had a lot of lime juice. And so why not? But we're not going to do things in that order. We're going to do things in a different order. We're going to start off with our pickled red onions, which is a condiment that I would suggest that you just have at home in general because it's simple and it's tasty. And it will store in the refrigerator forever. If you're like me, you love pickles. So maybe you're like me, maybe you're not. But pickling is also one of those great ways to help us preserve food. And since this one is so simple to put together, it's one of those things that even I keep at my house all the time because you can just take these delicious, salty and sweet pickled red onions and put them on pretty much anything as a condiment or as a straight up ingredient as we are here. And one of the great things about pickling is that not only does it help preserve food, but it's a great way to really brighten up otherwise plain, fairly boring dishes. And that's not to say that the squash that I've brought is plain or boring. It's not, but it is just squash. So we're gonna throw in some color and some vibrant flavor to make it all better. So what I have here, oh Lord, those onions. This is just red wine vinegar. And for this, I'm going to use that's about 2 cups of red wine vinegar. This is just regular old white sugar. So we have about 2 cups of red wine vinegar here. And this is gonna seem like a lot of salt, and it is. But salt and sugar are our main seasonings here, or our only seasonings. So we're just gonna use a lot of salt and sugar. 2 cups of red wine vinegar, and this is about a half cup of salt. You'll notice that I don't have my measuring cups with me.
You said that was sugar when you picked it up.
This is sugar, yes. Sugar, this is definitely sugar, not whatever I said. But it's kind of immaterial because we're also going to use the same quantity of what this time is actually salt. I swear.
That was a test.
And they passed with flying colors. That's right. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to bring this up to a boil and slice my onions just as thinly as I possibly can. If you have a mandolin, you could do this with a mandolin. If you have a box grater, like what you would shred your block of cheddar cheese with, they often have a slicing side on them. You could use that as well. They're not too terribly sharp, but it would work. Or you could just use a good old knife, which is my method of preference. Just slice these pretty much as thinly as you absolutely can into little strips. Some might call this a julienne. A julienne is really a thicker cut than what I'm doing right here. But we're going to slice them this thinly so that the vinegar can penetrate just as quickly as possible. This qualifies as what one would consider to be a quick pickle, meaning that it doesn't need to ferment. There are two basic kinds of pickles, ones that need fermentation through lactic acid, and then those that we use vinegar and some combination of preservatives with. In this case, we're going to be using the vinegar situation. It's not the only way to make a vinegar-based pickle. There are many different recipes for that. There are many different methods for that. And I'm sure that every single one of you has a cookbook at home somewhere that has a recipe for some kind of pickle. You don't have to stick to it. You can adapt it pretty much however you want, provided that the ratio of vinegar to salt and sugar stays the same. You can add whatever you want. You can change anything else you want. The ratio of vinegar to salt and sugar should stay the same to what's written. It should roughly be one portion, 1 unit of vinegar to a half portion, half unit of salt and sugar combined. So if you have 1 cup of vinegar, you should have half a cup of salt and sugar mixed together. The salt and sugar can have any ratio between the two of them depending upon what you want to have it taste like. But the salt and sugar as a combination should be in that same ratio with the vinegar itself. Having said that, if I wanted to make this more complicated and add other flavors, say coriander or dill or whatnot, it would probably need to sit around a little bit longer so that those more difficult flavors like coriander or mustard, you're getting it from a seed, that would take longer to extract. So it would need to sit around. But since we're just using sugar and salt, after only about 30 minutes, this is going to be ready to go. So I will just set this aside while I'm waiting for my vinegar to start boiling. And then I should have brought 2 cutting boards. Oh well. While I'm waiting for that, we'll go ahead and start cutting on our squash. And I've brought along a kind of squash that probably most of you have never seen before. This is a variety called Zephyr. It is an heirloom variety of squash that was bred in the 1880s, I think, not too long after the Civil War. In the Southeast. We don't know exactly where in the Southeast this Zephyr was first raised, but we know that it is probably between North Carolina and Mississippi in the southern Appalachian area. That's about the best we can do. Zephyr is notable because it has characteristics of both. You can see how this looks a little bit like a yellow crookneck squash, where it's enlarged on the end. It's got a little bit of a bend in it. But you'll notice that every single one of these has some combination of yellow and green on them. And I'm going to cut one of these just as a little sampler and pass it around to you so that you can just examine the inside of it. You'll notice that the texture, here you go. What a great time to play with food. You'll notice that the texture is a bit firmer than your standard zucchini or squash, which is one of the reasons why I like this particular variety, is because it will stand up to more intense cooking than your yellow crookneck or your green zucchini, so that I can get more flavor on it when it goes on the grill. That char on the outside isn't necessarily just burning. Sometimes it can be, but that char is also sugars that are present inside the squash developing into caramel. And you know as well as I do that caramel and sugar don't taste the same. Caramel has a deeper, more advanced flavor, and that's what we're going to be shooting for with that.
Where did you find that?
Don't inhale vinegar, by the way.
Uh-oh.
We got these from Woodland Gardens, which is a local farm. Much of our produce that we carry at Heirloom is from local purveyors, and all of our proteins are either from Georgia, are organic, cage-free, hormone-free, the whole 9 yards. Unfortunately, we're not able to source all of it from Georgia. Say our chicken, for example, comes from Virginia, but it has never seen the inside of a building until the day that it dies. It's raised outdoors, eats plants and animals that are found in the environment. It's great, healthy stuff. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's also what we stand for, so we shell out the money. Yeah, but this stuff right here, these squash came from Woodland Gardens, which is out in the industrial area of Clark County. I've forgotten exactly what road it's on, Spring Valley, I think maybe. But you can find their products at the Bishop Park Farmers Market, which happened earlier today. Might still be going on right now. But they offer all sorts of delicious stuff. And this is probably almost out of season. This is a fairly early flowering and early producing variety. We'll get right back to that. So my vinegar is now boiling. We're just going to put these onions right in there.
Have you ever made the onions with Georgia sweet onions?
I have made pickled onions with sweet Georgia onions, Vidalias in particular, but I like the red onions because of the color.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll see here in a minute, they turn to this nice pink, which will go very well with our charred yellow and green squash. And when it comes down to it, I just kind of prefer red onions. I like the bite that they have. That's probably good for that. We'll go ahead and turn that off, and we'll come back to that here in a few minutes. So for our squash, 2, 4, 6, 8, we'll call you 20. Okay. For the squash, I'm just going to, hey, how'd that happen? Cut the ends off. We're going to slice it in half. Do one more. And remember, this is not trash. This is compost, okay? If you're cooking at home and you don't have a compost pile, you should be ashamed of yourself, frankly. Sorry to impose my moralistic view of the world on you, but food waste is absurd. We waste and throw away about 40% of the food that is produced in the United States every year. And even though compost could be waste, it's really not, because it's turning into soil that is going to turn back into your food. And even if you're not doing it for a food garden, I bet every one of you has some sort of ornamental plant in your yard that could benefit from a compost application. I cannot stress too much how easy it is to keep a compost pile going. It's so simple. And you're producing food trash every single day. Just do it. So simple and smooth. So what we're going to do here is we're about to take a little field trip out to our grill station. But before we do that, I was talking about mise en place earlier. I want to have all of my things in their place before we're ready to go. So I'm going to give this just a light oiling, and apparently I'm going to lightly oil the table as well. And we're going to give this just a little sprinkling of salt. Remember, you can always add more later, but you cannot take it off once it's on. So always salt in phases, not just at the beginning or at the end, but as we go. If you salt your food 2 or 3 or 4 times in small quantities, that's what I do. Yes. This is Morton's kosher salt. Yep, the stuff that you can find in the grocery store. We just buy it 24 boxes at a time instead of a pound box at a time. But it is literally what you could find at Kroger. So there's that. Always have a good pair of grill tongs and a hot grill that is ready and waiting. And here we go. So as folks are still kind of trailing in right here, one of the reasons why I had the grill turned on earlier is because I like a hot grill. If the grill is cold, as I said earlier, when the food goes on, it's gonna stick. Also, hot works faster. So we had this thing out here raging. When I opened it up, smoke just billowing. And you're probably not as comfortable as I with putting your hands real close to fire like this. But when I'm doing this, it's to help me gauge about what temperature we're cooking at right now. And where my hand is right now is about 400 degrees. So that means that the surface is probably closer to 450, 475, which is a great grilling temperature. We're gonna start with the cut side down, because if we can make food that's already this pretty look even prettier with some nice grill marks, then why not? And because this squash is firm, we're going to take advantage of that firmness. Instead of having it just be a mouthful of yellow and green mush, that just doesn't even sound delicious, does it? We're gonna have some nice firm squash that still has a little bit of a bite to it. Like people talk about pasta being al dente. Well, we're gonna have our squash be a little al dente. And after a few sexy photographs, we're going to go ahead and shut the lid here and let it go. This is not gonna take too terribly long. If this takes 2 minutes, that's probably about where we're shooting right now. The lid is gonna help with that. In 30 seconds or so, I'm gonna twist my squash to give it that beautiful classic crisscross diamond pattern that everybody sees. And by the way, when you see that on the cover of a magazine, it's been drawn in with a marker. True story. No markers here, I promise. But let me tell you a little bit about squash. We got nothing else going on, so let's do some food history right now. As I mentioned earlier about the succotash, all 3 of those items are originally from North America. Well, squash is also a food that was domesticated by Native Americans beginning around 9,000 years ago. The first evidence that we have of domesticated squash comes from the Great Plains area of a thing that's called a buffalo gourd, which looks a little bit like a cucumber and a little bit like a cantaloupe. The buffalo gourd is still a plant that exists in the wild today. And we know that the buffalo gourd was being domesticated because people who study, botanists and anthropologists who study such things, can tell differences in the thickness of the shell wall or the size of the seeds that indicates that people were specifically selecting plants for a specific use. Those buffalo gourds eventually turned into things like acorn squash and pumpkin, butternut squashes, all the hard winter squashes that we think of. Those were the first varieties to develop. And then the softer varieties, such as this, or our typical yellow or zucchini, they were developed only later on. In fact, zucchini is really a modern invention. We've only had green zucchini around for about 150 years now, even though we think that it's this Italian classic. It's pretty new. So here our squash are beginning to sweat. You see we've got the beginnings of some good grill marks on there. Whoops. And of course, if you don't want to come outside and do this on the grill, You could always just sear these in a cast iron skillet in your pan, a cast iron pan in your house. Again, I would get the temperature of it just very, very hot. Cast iron will hold heat very, very well. And if you're trying to sear something or blacken it, cast iron is the way to go. In many ways, there is no more valuable tool in a kitchen than a cast iron skillet, because it's the closest thing you can have to a grill without actually having a grill. It holds the heat that way. In fact, in our kitchen, when we're serving items, that's usually what we're cooking out of. We have a special kind of cast iron skillet that is a French version, so it's a little bit thinner, but it still holds the heat really, really well. So if you don't have one of those, get one. Or you could just tell your hubby to go outside and fire up the grill and put the squash on it, because it's hot and he deserves to go outside and sweat because he's in the doghouse or something. I don't know. Yes. Well, what we do is keep cast irons in the oven at about 500 degrees so that when we're ready to cook something on the range itself, we're not having to wait for the pan to get hot. We just pull it out, put it on, turn the fire on, the pan's already hot. It saves a few seconds for us, but when you're cooking for 100 people a night, 30 seconds makes a difference over the course of time. So that's what we do. We use the same pans for baking as well as sauteing. So for example, when we're making our vegan gluten-free cornbread, what we'll do is we'll take one of these cast iron pans, get it preheated in the oven, and then when the batter is ready, again, I have a hot pan that I put the oil in and then my batter in, so that the surface of it basically is sealing instantly, and then it goes into the oven to finish. But I also, if I'm sauteing fish, I'm using the same pans, just for a different application.
But you're sauteing in the oven?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Or sometimes I saute on the grill. We have an indoor grill, and it's hot enough to where if my range is full, that I can put pans on there and to do that as well. So that is all to say, if you are outside and you need to boil your vinegar for your delicious pickled red onions, you could do that on the grill too. It doesn't have to necessarily be done on a burner. It'll take a little bit longer because this isn't as hot or as intense as that flame in there, but you can certainly use this as a range top. There's no reason. Yes, ma'am.
You close the grill, so if I'm using cast iron, I need a cast iron lid.
For some applications, yeah, but for others, no. I would say if you're doing something like a braised pork shoulder, something like that, then it would be beneficial. But if you're making a pot of rice or a pot of soup, you probably could just use use another saute pan or something like that just to put on top of it. The type of lid material wouldn't really matter too terribly much. I would say that would matter more if it was going into the oven and it was going to be under heat for a long time, like a roast or a braise or a casserole or something like that.
The question was about a cup.
Any other questions?
If you're doing it on a pan,
Mm-hmm.
on top of the stove, does it need a cover?
I probably would
Again, another
not.
question about the cover.
Yeah, I the only time I really use covers for something is if it's going in the oven or if I expect it to be really spattery. You know, a piece of fried chicken going into a pan is going to spit and pop a whole lot. And you've probably seen them in the stores, you maybe even have one, a splatter screen that you can just pop right over the top of it. And that goes a long way to prevent it. Or a top. However, if you were frying chicken, you wouldn't really want to have a top because then the chicken is steaming as it's frying and you're not going to get that great crispiness to it. In general, my advice would be for something that's cooking quickly, meaning in 15 minutes or less, you don't need a top. I covered this because we're outdoors and because I do want it to go faster. If I were doing this in a saute pan inside, I would not have a cover for it. Okay, you can tell by how these are starting to wrinkle that we're about halfway done now. Our grill marks are getting there. And you can see, I was talking earlier about caramelization. Like, this is not burning. This is sugars that are natural in the squash that are being turned to caramel and is giving us a little bit of extra flavor for this already delicious squash.
Looks delightful.
Well, thank you. And we're probably one whole entire minute out from there. And then once it comes off the grill, very much like meat, because these are like larger sections. You know, when I pull them off the grill, they're not going to be done all the way through. I'm going to pull them off early on purpose because very much like meat, there are juices in this squash that are trying to get out right now. And the ones that are still in there, when they're done cooking, they'll try to go back inside. So we're going to let them rest for a few minutes. What we call carryover temperature, the residual heat that the squash has in of itself, is going to continue the cooking as it sits right here. And that way also, when I'm ready to cut it, it won't be too hot for me to handle. You know, so 45 seconds, another minute in here, and then I'm going to put it on my cutting board. We'll all go back inside. And then I'll probably start on the next step with our succotash before I decide to come back and cut this so that it stays juicy and that I don't burn my precious little fingertips.
Jason,
Yes.
are any of these foods on the menu at Heirloom?
They are not.
They are not at. Okay.
They are not.
All right.
Something similar to the succotash is going to be making its way onto our vegetable plate soon. We just unveiled our summer menu 3 weeks ago, or maybe a month now. I've forgotten exactly what. And I don't work lunches very often, so I've forgotten exactly what is on the lunch menu. But if you come for dinner, here's what we have at the moment. We have a house-smoked pork barbecue plate that comes with collard greens, a black-eyed pea salad, a piece of white bread, sliced sweet yellow onions, house-made pickles, homemade barbecue sauce. We have our grass-fed burger is a 6-ounce patty that right now is coming topped with caramelized onions and pimento cheese, which is house-made. Our vegetable patty, which is house-made, right now has a slice of cheddar cheese, a purple mustard that is made with grape juice. It's delicious. And then a house-made tomato jam. We're offering a confit chicken quarter that's fried. Confit means that it has been slow cooked in a lot of fat. So what we do is we take all these chicken quarters, put them in a pan, cover them with oil, and let them roast at a relatively low temperature, which is, what did we do it at? We cooked it at 325 for an hour and 20 minutes, so the chicken is completely cooked through, but very tender because it's been sitting in oil the entire time. And then once it's cooled, then we take it out, put it in buttermilk, put it in a seasoned flour, and then fry it to order so that our chicken is already completely cooked and it can be served in about 6 minutes. Instead of, if we were to take a regular little chicken thigh or a thigh quarter, it would take, stereotypically, that takes 18 minutes to do, which is a very long time if you're in a professional kitchen. That's a long time for somebody to have to wait for their food. We want people to have their food in about 15, maybe 20 minutes. And if you've got an item that's going to take 20 minutes to cook, and it's going to take 15 minutes before you can even get to it because you're cooking other things, that's just really not feasible. Nobody here wants to place their food and then be told 30 minutes later on that your food is still in the kitchen. You know, we all want timely service, so we try to think about things like that. I'm not suggesting that you should confit your chicken at home, although it is a foolproof thing. It's just one of those steps that we take. Anyway, fried chicken thigh quarter with good old sauteed buttered green beans with garlic and buttermilk mashed potatoes. That comes topped with a black pepper gravy. Let's see what else. We've got shrimp and grits right now that we're featuring with Georgia caught shrimp, as well as Dayspring Farms, which is here in Clark County. Grits from them. That's being served with a Cajun gravy, which is a tomato and clam juice based gravy. Our vegetable plate comes with a basically daily rotating cast of characters. It's 4 sides, all vegetarian and or vegan, with our vegan gluten-free cornbread. Right now, the veg plate has our collard greens, German-style potato salad, a grilled squash, and onions, but we're not doing pickled red onions. We're doing just grilled onions. That's been dressed in a little bit of our house vinaigrette. And then what is side number 4 today? I'll be doing that when I get back, and I think I'm going to do stewed okra and tomatoes for that. The okra is, again, from here in Clark County, and our tomatoes, the ones that we'll be sampling today, are from Ladybird Farm, which is also here in Clark County. And we got some other stuff on the menu too. Just come and look at it. It's delicious. We can go back inside where there's some air conditioning. And again, I'm just going to let this hang out on my cutting board for a few minutes. We'll do a little check-in here with our onions. Again, this was the color of our onion to start with, and this will be a little bit difficult to see, but these are the colors of our onions now. You can see how they've become a little bit more translucent, and what once upon a time was a purple color is now this really cute pink, and it's just going to continue sitting there being delicious. And now we are going to move on to our succotash. And as I've said a couple times, this succotash doesn't really have to be any one specific set of ingredients. The important parts are that you have some kind of legume, tomatoes, and corn. And I'm also today going to, just because I like flavor, throw in a little bit of garlic. And instead of regular salt for this dish, I'm going to be using an herb salt that I put together a couple days ago so that the flavors of the herbs will infuse into the salt itself. And again, this is something that I would encourage you just to have on hand at home. It is the easiest thing in the world to do. And instead of just putting the flavor of salt onto your food, in this case, I'm also going to be putting the flavor of thyme and rosemary and oregano onto my food. It'll be subtle, but those subtle differences can very often make the big difference between a dish that's good and a dish that's, you know, this is great. And I'll be the first one to admit that one of the reasons why I like working in the industry that I work in is when people come up to me and say, that was so good. You know, it's really gratifying, and it doesn't happen all that often because kitchens often like to be sort of hidden. We as culinary professionals are not very often the ones who really want to seek the limelight. We're a bunch of weirdos who are isolated from the general public for a reason. But it still is nice to have somebody come up to you and say, you know, that was a really amazing dish. Because, okay, I'll reveal the secret. The real reason why I like doing what I'm doing is because what my work is turning into someone's living body. The work of my hands keeps my customers alive. They don't just, they come there for the experience of having a nice meal or having a conversation. I come there because I know that the thing that I enjoy doing is providing a life for a person in a very real way, you know, and that there's not much of a more intimate connection between two people than to feed one. You know, when you're providing food, whether it be for your children or for the people who are paying me to be there, I'm providing life for them. And that creates a bond. Sometimes it's a real close bond. Sometimes it's an artificial bond. but it makes me happy. So little things like herb salt are a great way to help your customers stay happy, whether that customer be your significant other or the grandkids.
We have a question.
Are those fresh or dry?
These were all fresh. They're dried now.
Yeah. I didn't know what you thought
We have a little herb garden in the front of the store. So although we use so many herbs that we still have to order them from conventional purveyors, but we have the stuff up front that we often go to pick from. And all of this, the rosemary, the oregano, and the thyme, came from our herb garden. Yeah, easy. It takes seconds to put together, and if you've got some herbs growing in your yard or your planter box or whatever, it's a great way to preserves the herbs as well as adds other flavors to your food. And you could do other things as well. It doesn't have to just be thyme and basil, or not. There's no basil in there. Basil actually wouldn't work very well because it's so tender. But you could do things like, I've got rosemary in there. You could do lavender or in sugar as well. Lavender has this beautiful floral, lotiony kind of aroma. It can be overpowering, but still is tasty. Or things like borage or lovage. Pretty much anything that you can find in your spice cabinet. If you wanted to put it into a little spice mill and throw it in there with salt, that would work great too. Be creative. So anyway, we're going to use some of that. And although I did bring a ton of corn with me already, I did want to talk about the mandolin a little bit. This is not an item that is terribly common in homes. This is an item that is very common in professional kitchens. It is essentially a device that is designed to cut off the ends of your fingers. So I'm going to show you another way that you can shell corn, but when you're doing this much corn, a mandolin is kind of the way to go. Now, I know that you can buy corn that is already shucked at the grocery store. I recommend that for the convenience of it only, but if you really want the corn to taste fresh, even if it's not 100% picked from the garden that day, you should buy it with the shuck still on. It will retain more moisture that way. And you can also, if you decide to have a grill out day, and instead of just cooking your fancy squash on the grill, you could also grill your corn, in which case I would soak it in water with the husk on for about an hour, and then take it with the husk still on, put it on the grill, keep it rotated. When the husk is black as sin, then it's ready. And you can eat it just like that. This is a Silver Queen hybrid. I'm not exactly sure what which variety it is, but this is going to be just naturally sweet. I could eat it like this right now. But when it comes off of the grill after having been grilled in its husk like that, it's practically like candy. It's so good. Which again is one of the reasons why it needs to go in the simple dish with very few other ingredients, because it's going to highlight the deliciousness of the corn. And if you're a Southern boy like me, you don't need much more than a good piece of grilled corn on the cob to satisfy you on a July afternoon, So I've got my mandolin here, and it's set to the highest setting. I know it's going to be a little bit difficult to see, but this is about a half an inch, a little bit less than half an inch, but greater than a quarter of an inch. And all I'm going to do is just take my ear of corn and run it across the razor blade like so. And the kernels just come off easy as pie. Of course, they also go everywhere. And in professional kitchens, what we would do to help maintain or constrain this mess would be to have another container. We have large pans about so wide that we call hotel pans. There's a standard size, I've forgotten what it is, but we would have this hotel pan, and I would put my mandolin in the hotel pan, and then I would, get remove, that's the word I was looking for, remove the kernels into the hotel pan. That way I'm not all over the table like I am here. Or we could always, if we don't have a mandolin at home, the way that I would get all of my kernels off. And by the way, if you do buy fresh corn, you could put the cob under water to scrub all of the hairs off of it, or you could take a little towel and do the same thing, or you could be like my grandma always was, and I myself am now, just not too fussy about it and eat a little bit of corn silk. It's okay. Exactly. So now that I've shucked my corn, I'm just going to cut the bottom of it off a little bit and give myself a flat surface. That can also go to our compost pile. And then flat surface so that it will stand straight up. And again, if I were doing this at work, I would have another pan around this so the kernels are not going everywhere. And I might, depending upon how much room I had, I might also put a little bowl underneath it, just to give myself a little bit of elevation and so that my knife is not running into the pan underneath it, because I don't want my knife to get dull from hitting metal all the time. But I'm not going to hit metal today, so I'm not worried about it. But just slide it right down. And if you're not super close to the cob, it's not a big deal. And I'm about to show you why. So, having fresh corn is wonderful because it tastes great. But with advances in modern food storage, specifically frozen products, it's very easy to get corn, particularly corn, in a bag frozen in kernel form that's just as good as what you would get from your garden, because it's frozen so quickly after it's been harvested that every bit of nutrition that would be otherwise lost in storage has been locked into it. And so go to your Publix or your Kroger or what have you, and go to your frozen goods section, and all of those things that are in bags that are, whether it's your lima beans or your corn or your mixed veg or whatever, it is just as good as the stuff that came out of the garden that day. It's got just as much vitamins. It will be a little bit mushier, but it's no less healthy. And it is a great workaround if you don't have a garden or if you want some of this stuff out of season. I recommend the frozen things. Canned stuff is a different situation, but things that are in the frozen section, feel free to use them as though they were fresh. I would let them defrost beforehand. Yes.
You agree with that with green beans?
Yeah, I sure do. They're frozen at such low temperatures and so quickly that the only difference, and with corn, it's not going to be as bad. The only difference is a texture difference that comes about through the defrosting process. If you cook them from frozen, it's going to be almost indistinguishable from something that is fresh. Again, canned is not the case, but it's in the business we say IQF, which stands for individually quick frozen, and that applies to both vegetables as well as meat products. They're frozen under vacuum at temperatures that are so cold that you would die if you were exposed to them. So they go from being fresh to basically frozen solid in seconds, to the point where moisture doesn't even have the chance to evaporate. The biggest difference, like I said, is the texture. So if you have a hankering for some succotash in the middle of December and you can't find fresh corn, go to the grocery store, get the frozen stuff, it'll be fine. The difference between corn that's fresh on the cob and stuff that comes in the bag, though, is this. I can milk this and get the really good flavor out of this cob, but I can't do that with the stuff in a bag. And all of this liquid that you see in there right now, in the bottom of that, that's where I took all the cobs that produced all of that kernel corn right there and did just this. I took the back of my knife and just ran down it like this, And it's not, of course, actually milk because that comes from animals, but this corn juice in here is some of the most intense flavor of the entire cob. And since I'm trying to have food that tastes delicious, why would I throw flavor away? So just a little bit like that. And that, in my opinion, is the real reason to choose fresh corn over frozen corn. Of course, that also makes a huge mess, as you can tell. And you should have seen the wall that I was working beside yesterday when I finished all that. There was corn juice everywhere. Okay, where's my pot? There's my pot. All right. Now, of course, you're not going to have a large, well, you might, I don't know. You're probably not going to have a large rondo like this at your house. I brought this because I'm cooking for more than just a few people. And I also didn't want to transport a lot of equipment, so I'm going to reuse this in a few minutes. But I'm just going to start with a little bit of my oil. And just like with the grill, it's always a great idea to make sure that your pans are hot first. There are very few things that you're going to put into a cold pan and expect it not to stick. Sometimes you do want things to stick because it produces a nice, what we call fond, which is just French for bottom, which we then scrape up. It's the brown bits that make a bunch of flavor in our sauces and stuff. But I'm not making a sauce right now. I'm making succotash. So my oil is a little warm. And what did I say? There were about 20 of you. So here is about 2 tablespoons, give or take, of chopped garlic. And since I'm dispensing professional wisdom for the home cook, this is another thing that you can just do and keep at home. You can go to the grocery store and buy cans or jars of garlic and oil, but I don't like them because they always taste bitter. And if you're not very careful with garlic in oil in your refrigerator, the USDA has shown that it can inadvertently become contaminated just through use. It is a potential source of foodborne illness. But when you chop your own garlic in your food processor at home or by hand, if you have the inclination, you can just put it into a plastic container or a jar, and this is good until it starts turning slimy. A week, 10 days, something like that, it will just sit in there. It can be in your refrigerator. If you put it in your food processor, pulse it for a few minutes, it'll take you 5 minutes. You've chopped your garlic for the week. I would just have it sitting around. I do, and it's in my refrigerator right now at home, so that I don't have to do it every single time. I wish that were a little bit hotter. Oh well. There we go. So now you can hear the garlic. I suppose you can hear. Hello, microphone. Can we hear? My eyes definitely heard it. Oh. Okay, so my garlic is beginning to brown just a little bit right now. And I'm going to go ahead and add in my corn. I'm putting the corn in first because the corn is the part that's going to take the longest to cook. And I'm not going to need all of this. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball this. And notice that I'm reaching down into the bottom to get some of that delicious liquid that I was talking about. Come on. There we go. Now, most of that liquid is not going to actually make its way onto the plate. It's going to wind up caramelizing or otherwise reducing. Okay, that is trash. That's not compost. But because this corn is fresh, it's only going to take just a few seconds. And then the next thing that's going to take the longest time will be our field peas. I cooked these peas, today is Saturday, I cooked them on Thursday, and they were cooked with just a little bit of I used yellow onion and some garlic and some salt. And since these were fresh peas, they didn't have to soak overnight like you might do with dried beans. They cooked in about 45 minutes from I got my pot boiling and I put my peas in there, and about 45 minutes after they went in, they were ready to go. And there they are. And again, I'm just kind of eyeballing, as I was mentioning earlier, with things like this, there's really, I don't think, a reason for us to need to write things down so much. You can be creative, you can be adaptable, you can cook to your circumstances, and hopefully enjoy yourself by doing that. I know that like trying new things sometimes stresses people out, but whenever I see like a new squash or an ingredient didn't show up on my delivery order yesterday, I'm like, this is not a hassle, this is an opportunity, So today, field peas and no measurements. And then, as I said earlier, salting as we go with my fancy herb salt. I'm not going to put a whole lot. Why don't y'all pass this around and just smell that? Good. And as I said, these are fresh local cherry tomatoes that came from Ladybird Farm. I believe Ladybird also offers at the Bishop Park Farmers Market. I'm not entirely sure. They're a relatively small and relatively new farm, but they're good people and they have good food. Okay. And that's the long and short of it right there, folks. This is your easy side dish for your backyard barbecue or your family get-together of whatever variety. And although this is not quite yet done, I'm still going to be doing some cooking. This is what it's looking like so far. Super straightforward. It's corn, it's peas, it's tomatoes, it's colorful, and it's fresh, and it will hopefully be very tasty. Hey. Oh, yeah. Don't forget the most important customer of all. Got to make it for the camera. All righty. Okay, so we're going to let that go still for just a few minutes. And while that's going, we're going to go back to our squash. Well, A, you can find heirloom squash. You just got to go to the farmer's market to get it. B, I would say probably a yellow crookneck, but one that is not too terribly ripe. Or I also kind of like grilling the hard winter squashes, but they often have to be parboiled before you do that. I find their flavor to be better, and that's one of the reasons why I chose this particular squash, is because it has a firmer texture, and in my mind that translates to more flavor. Certainly it has a different like mouthfeel consistency to it. But you could also just use whatever you think tastes good. You know, I don't have your taste buds in my mouth, so I don't know what you would like. So if you find that your yellow squash is not working out the way that you want it, you could try zucchini, or you could not use squash at all. A vegetable like kohlrabi would work great. You could also grill cabbage to do something like this with, or celery root is not too terribly popular a vegetable, but that would work great in something like this. For this particular preparation with the pickled red onions, I would say even sweet potatoes would probably be really tasty. So squash isn't working for you, pick something else. But here our squash is ready. And I knew that I would forget something, and that something was a container to mix my food in. There's always something, you know. My coworker who gave me a lift over here, he and I were talking about that. He and I have both done many types of demonstrations over the course of the years, and a comment that Forrest made was basically you have to take the kitchen with you, which is it's not possible. You know, I'm accustomed to working in a professional kitchen. I am accustomed to having everything at my fingertips. So in a situation like this, I have to think to myself, like, what exactly do I need? What thing do I think that I'll need? And what's that one thing that I should have known that I'm going to need, but will forget until right that moment? There's always something. And today it was the mixing bowl. And as I said, we're going to be salting, seasoning all along the way. But what you should also be doing is tasting as you are testing. Testing your tasting. Because how are you going to know how salty it is unless you have tasted it? Where's that salt? All right, great. Oh man, with that corn in there, you'd think I'd put sugar in it. That's delicious. It's also done. But first things first.
Mixing the onions with
I sure am. Yep. And that's all that this little dish right here is the onions and the squash and some heat and some salt or some seasoning. And since our first two dishes are ready at the same time, why don't I just go ahead and load up some plates and pass around two samplers all at once, and then that'll, sure. That'll give me a little opportunity to reset and get ready for our final dish number 3. And also, if you have any questions, now will be a fantastic time. You don't necessarily have to raise your hand since my eyes are down right now. Just shout them out if you have a question. Yes. Mm-hmm. Sure. Mm-hmm. Vinegar. Yeah. When it comes right down to it, there's really nothing from a biological perspective. There's nothing that is going to substitute for sodium chloride. But from a flavor perspective, anything that, as you say, the citric vein, lime juice in particular pairs with lots of very different flavors. Or, as I said, vinegar. I am a fan of apple cider vinegar. Trying to think what else might sort of offset or substitute for salt. Some herbs have a sort of salty quality to them, like sage and rosemary, for example. Both have some sort of salty aspect, so heavy use of those. That's probably the best advice I could give. Sure. Oh, thank you. Oh, you think so? Yeah.
The best, what was it? French fries? Oh, yes, the French fries are fabulous.
The vegan chocolate cake is amazing.
Yes, that is true too.
I don't do much pastry. I do have some experience baking over an independent baking company, so I know bread. But when I started working at Heirloom and found out about that vegan chocolate cake that we have over there, I kind of went nuts because for it to have no eggs in it, it is so good.
Jason, there's a number of vegan meals or dishes that you have at the restaurant, correct?
There are, yes.
So if you're in a plant-based diet, it's wonderful.
We actively strive to plan for dietary restrictions. We have so many people who come that are vegan or vegetarian or wheat-free or whatnot that many years ago, Heirloom, way before my time, Heirloom realized that if they didn't just offer those options, then it was making everybody's job that much more difficult. So pretty much whatever your dietary restriction is, there's something on our menu for you. You don't need reservations, and for lunch and for brunch, we don't accept reservations. You can, for larger parties, make a reservation, but that's for like 10 or 15 or more people. However, at dinner, we do accept reservations for dinner. And since we're talking about our hours and reservations and whatnot, let me just tell you about that overall. Heirloom is open for lunch from 11 to 2:30 on Tuesday through Friday. We are open for brunch from 9:30 to 2:30 on Saturday and Sunday. And then dinner, we are open from 5 to 9 Wednesday through Saturday. As I said, we accept reservations for dinner. We do not accept reservations for lunch or brunch unless you are a larger party. In fact, on Tuesday, I will be there for lunch because we have a party of 25 who will be coming in at 1 o'clock, which is a very large table for lunch. Those are our hours. We also, if you are interested in special events and have a few extra dollars to shell out, every second Tuesday of the month, we offer our second Tuesday wine dinner, wherein for this is such a steal, really. It's $50 per person for 5 wines, 5 courses of food. And the food is tailored individually for the wines that are being offered. Unfortunately, you missed out on the one this month. It was just this past Tuesday. But beginning on the 29th or the 30th of this month, you can sign up for our August wine dinner, which will be, again, the second Tuesday of August, the date of which escapes me at the moment. Yes?
So you're closed other than for folks dining out?
That's right. We'll still be open for lunch that day, but those dinners start at 6:30 and they run until about 9. And for it to only be $50 a person, I'm not even trying to brag on the restaurant. it's a steal, y'all. We usually limit it to about 40, 45 people. So it's very much a first sign up, first serve sort of situation. And if you're interested in it, at least potentially, I would sign up or call the restaurant as soon as you possibly can, because it sells out every month without question. It's fun for us because we get to do unusual or interesting things that we don't do on a day-to-day basis. And it's also, since it's a planned event, there are never really any surprises for the kitchen. Everything is all very, very smooth. The kitchen sample, the people who plan the menu, sample some wines ahead of time. They're provided by one of our purveyors. We select from amongst those wines the 5 that we enjoy the most, and then we plan the menu based upon the 5 wines that we have selected. Typically, it's 2 reds, 2 whites, and a sparkling. And sometimes it's 2 whites first, 2 reds, and then a dessert wine, or sometimes the sparkling might come first, and then red, white, or whatever. It all depends upon what we want to do. If I can remember everything, I'll tell you what we had Tuesday. I've forgotten what the wines were, but course number 1 was just a crostini with grilled orange segments and a sesame yogurt with wildflower honey and some other thing. Super straightforward, simple. It was only Tuesday, and I've already forgotten it. Anyway, absolutely.
There was no sugar.
None at all. That was all the corn.
Was that not unbelievable? Let's give Jason a round of applause.
Oh, thanks.
For what we at least had thus far. And we're running a little bit over time, but
Oh, well, I can speed up. That's for sure.
it's going to be fabulous.
On your wine nights, do we need an Uber?
I don't know how your liver works, so maybe not. They're not full glasses of wine. I can say that it's not a full pour, and I've never seen anyone act intoxicated there, so I doubt it.
Now, where are y'all located?
At the intersection of Chase Street and Boulevard, across the street from the Salvation Army, just down the street from Chase Street Elementary, in what used to be an old Chevron.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, so since we're running a little bit over, we'll do this last one a little bit quicker. Maybe with me not being so talkative. Okay, this last one is my version of green beans amandine, and if there's a little bit of corn or a field pea in there, forgive me. Now, a traditional amandine would be made with almonds and lemon juice and white wine and butter. As I mentioned, I'll be using lime juice today, and I didn't bring butter with me because it would have melted. And also because vegan cooking is challenging, and I do like a good challenge. So we're going to start again with a little bit of our garlic there. It's not nearly as hot as I want it to be, but oh well. And then these are already cooked. By the way, we're using blanched green beans. They were whole and fresh when I got them. I got some very salty water boiling. I put them in there. As soon as, like the instant that they were finished, I took them out and put them into some ice water to stop the cooking. That way, this is only going to take just a few minutes. My mushrooms, on the other hand, these are several varieties of oyster mushrooms. We source our mushrooms from a local company named Blitz Brothers. They do not sell retail. Was that a question? Okay. They do not sell retail, so unfortunately you can't purchase Blitz Brothers mushrooms yourself. You would have to go to a wholesale provider or to a retail salesperson or a restaurant to get them. But these are oyster mushrooms that are produced right here in Clark County. Oyster mushrooms are considered fancy because they're hard to cultivate. But these people are cultivating them, and they do taste just a little bit like oysters. They're not too terribly strong. They're mostly texture, and they also look really cool before you cut them. They, in the wild, they grow out of the sides of trees and have this sort of like cup-looking appearance, or like upside-down shelves or whatnot. They're really awesome. Mushrooms are very good for you. You should include them in your diet. They have, they're high in protein. For them to not be a legume, they are a pretty high in protein food. They're also high in phosphorus, which is an essential nutrient for us. And they are fairly high in fiber as well. So if you are one of those people who needs to have your digestive area taken care of well, mushrooms is a great way to do it without having a whole lot of like super roughage that's going to maybe clog you up, like say quinoa or a whole grain like that. Mushrooms are good for that. Oh, that was a lot. Okay. So those are going to take just a minute and probably need a little bit of extra oil. Okay, yeah, wow. Let's go ahead and get those started in there. And now my herb salt for extra flavor. Nope. And then here are my sunflower seeds. I just grabbed these on a whim because I thought, why not? And I would encourage you to do such things at home as well. See something at the grocery store that is on a special and you've never used it before, or something that's on the manager's discount. Kroger, I know, always has discount meats and discount breads. They're sometimes even discount produce. I encourage you to go and find something that you've never used before, pick it up and just try it. You know, you'll never learn what you like and don't like unless you try stuff that you've never had before. And who knows, maybe oyster mushrooms and sunflower seeds are not a great combination. I doubt that. But I've never had them this way. And as I was leaving the store, I wanted some crunch, so I picked up the sunflower seeds. They're going to be now. So the longest thing that's going to have to cook here will be these mushrooms, which I left in sort of larger pieces. Actually, that's not an edible piece right there. I left in a little bit larger pieces because I like the sort of textural bite to it. I don't want it to disappear. I want to know what's in my food. So yeah. Generally, if I'm cooking in this particular like saute style fashion, it's going to be open because I want the liquid to go away. Yeah. There are applications in which I would put a cover on it, but those would be applications in which I'm going to be applying lower heat for a longer temperature. And I also want all of the juices to stay in because the juices are where the flavor is. And then here, just a little bit of lime juice. And that's just going to have to go for a second until those mushrooms are done. And that's also... I wish it was more glamorous than that, but that's all there is to that. There's everything just has to wait for the heat to do its purpose and then for you to eat it and hopefully enjoy it. This very much off the cuff green beans almondine. You know, I think I want some more of my almondine in there actually. Oh gosh. I just like beans. Probably, I don't know, man. Black-eyed peas, maybe? Black-eyed peas, perhaps? Or these field peas are very similar. I like black-eyed peas because you can cook them. Well, first of all, because I'm a, hillbilly twice removed. But because you can cook black-eyed peas and field peas from dry in the same amount of time that you can cook them when they're fresh. So unlike, say, dried kidney beans or dried black beans, which in order to cook either need like 6 hours of cooking or they need to soak overnight, with dried black-eyed peas and field peas, you can take them out of the bag, off the shelf, put them in some boiling water, and they're ready by the time the rest of your food is. So they're pretty straightforward and simple and good. But while that's going, y'all, because it is a little bit later than I thought it was myself, and I do have to cook tonight for dinner. Yeah, but it won't be nearly as fun as this. Probably right at the very end. Because in this particular application, I wouldn't want the butter to burn or brown. And if I put it in too much earlier, it's going to lose some of that creaminess. So like just right at the last instant to give it some shine.
How many staff members do you have in the kitchen?
Gosh, when we're fully staffed, I think we have 14 cooks. But as everybody has already, I'm sure, heard, restaurants around the globe or around the country right now are having real issues keeping people. So even though we probably need, I think 14 is the number, we're right now working with 11, I think. So on any given shift, we'll have 3 people who are actually cooking the food, 1 person who is functioning as what we call the expo, and that's essentially it's expediter is the full word. That person is essentially the kitchen manager on duty at the time, and as the sous chef, I'm often the expediter. The chef is often the expediter. We function as a person who coordinates between front of house and back of house, which is servers and cooks. Because with a whole bunch of people trying to talk to each other all at one time, it's chaos. So we try and have a sort of choke point or a pinch point where all of the front of house communication is going to one person to filter it, and then that person filters it back out to the people in the kitchen who need to know it. That way our time management skills stay more closely aligned front and back. So 4 people in the kitchen, and usually 2 or 3 or 4 servers, bartenders, server assistants, something like that. So when we have the least amount of people in the restaurant, we have 7, and when we have the most, it's 12 people who are around the restaurant. Yep. I have just, here we go. That's about ready. Let's do it. And speaking of food and crisis situations, if you happen to be driving by Heirloom and you have some spare food in your own cupboard that you want to bring by, we have an unplugged refrigerator that is sitting out in front of our parking lot that I see people stop by on a day-to-day basis. We have people who come and get food out of there every single day. So if you have some stuff, even if it's just a can or a loaf of bread that you think is going to go stale before you get to all of it. Oh no.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I'm sorry.
Or if you are yourself in a position where, or someone needs a meal, stop by our refrigerator out there. There will be something. And if you, in all honesty, if you find yourself to be in a position where you don't know where your next meal is coming from, send not Earth Fair, I don't work there anymore. Send Heirloom an email or a call, and we can put you in contact with the right people to help with those resources. It is very much part of our ethos there at Heirloom that food is the creation of community. And we believe that...
You've got only one more.
Okay.
You're doing great.
We at Heirloom very firmly believe that it is
That's it.
Yes.
our duty to serve our community through our food. So again, if you are or if you know of someone who is in a situation of food insecurity, contact us. We have the relationships with the right people who can help out.
Any other follow-up questions?
Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause. I think this is great.
Thanks, y'all.